So when you learn about comparative advantage, normally people talk about countries. I don't want to talk about countries. I'm going to pick on this poor unfortunate soul because she's looking at her phone. 2 people. We're the only 2 people in the world. We both have children. We're only 2 adults. There's nobody else. We have to provide food, shelter, clothing. It would be nice to raise our children instead of leaving them while we provide food, shelter, clothing. She is better at everything than I am. She's better at getting food. She's better at providing shelter. She's better at getting clothing. She's better at raising the children. So she has one choice. She could take me over. She's better at everything. And she's looking over at me saying, I don't want to take that over. That's just fine. We'll just keep them over there. So we're not going to war. We're not hostile. She could then conclude, there's nothing that I can get from this guy. I'm better at everything than him. That's called absolute advantage. And everything we do, we're just trying to take care of our little households, she's better than me. The power of trade, gains from trade, specialization, and comparative advantage is, even though that's true, she should trade with me, even though I stink at everything. Why? Let's say, I'm actually terrible at all these things except childcare, and when my girls get older to teenage years, they'll tell me I'm terrible at childcare too. So let's just pretend that I'm good at childcare and getting food, but I'm terrible at shelter and clothing. She's much better at shelter and clothing, only a little better. Better, but only a little better at food and childcare. She should offer to trade with me and say, look, I can provide shelter and clothing for both of us so much faster than you can that you shouldn't do this. And in exchange, you're not great at providing food and childcare, but you're pretty close to me. You specialize in that. I will specialize in shelter and clothing, and we'll trade. And in that situation, we'll all get more of everything. We'll get more food because I have all this time. I'm not quite as good as her at getting food, but I now have all this free time. I'm not banging my head against the wall trying to make clothing and fix shelter. We'll get more childcare. Again, I'm almost as good as her. Not as good, but almost as good. And I have all this free time. And she's going to provide both of us with plenty of shelter and clothing because she's so good at it. That's just 2 of us. Obviously, in a world with just 2 people, you don't try to do everything yourself. If you like Chick-fil-A sandwiches, you're not getting them in a world with 2 people if you try to do everything yourself. You come out of specialization. But even with a 2-person advantage, she's better than me at everything. It makes us both better off if we trade. Communities, same thing. One community has good agricultural land. They know how to work it. They've built up time working it. They don't have any stone. They make these huts. The huts stink. The other community has the stone. They have practice with the stone. Trade. In a situation with absolute advantage, we trade. In normal situations in the world where we have something, you have something, we trade. When people talk about comparative advantage, what they mean is, I don't have to be better than her at anything. And we'll both gain. Unless you want to go to war, just say these people stink. They're just going to take over. We want their stuff. Unless you want to go to war, it makes sense for us to both gain, and the reason to trade. And the reason it does is because trade allows specialization. If we don't trade, she can't specialize in what she's good at, and neither can I, because I have to provide everything. We don't really have individuals in this situation. You know, when I was younger, they used to find Japanese holdouts in Pacific Islands. I'm like, really? You sure this wasn't a plant? But maybe they were really holdouts. But they didn't have any option to trade because there wasn't anybody there. It's very hard to think of a situation where there are 2 people. But we know a country that does a really good job of never wanting to trade with anyone. Anyone want to guess the country? Yes, excellent. How's that working out for them? You can always eat grass, even if there's like good food down south, doesn't matter. So I'll stop singling you out. I'll single someone else out as soon as I have the opportunity. Even, trade doesn't make sense. Ricardo is very famous. He's the person who came up with the comparative advantage, or publicized comparative advantage, and he's very famous. And he did Britain and Portugal and textiles and wine. Don't start at the country level. Start about how insane it would be if everyone in this room said, I don't want to trade with anyone who's not as good as me at doing something. I want to do everything myself. I don't want to specialize. Good luck. I mean, if I'm better than all of you at everything, I'm still going to make myself miserable trying to do it all. So the bedrock of trade is something that we take for granted here. Of course, individuals trade. Of course, communities trade. Of course cities trade. Of course states trade. Sorry, Nevada is now no longer going to trade with California. They're stealing our jobs. People don't say that because it's ridiculous. The line that gets crossed is when it's countries, somehow it's different. Countries are different. No, they're not. Countries are made up of people. You choose to buy imports. You choose to work in certain areas. You choose to specialize. So that example, which we take for granted, two people, of course they're going to trade, otherwise you're going to starve. It's the same thing with countries. And there's a numerical example in your text about how this country is better at both things than the other country, and they should still trade and they can get more output. And it's all very abstract, and it's true. I'm not arguing with David Ricardo. Wouldn't be good for my career path. But I want you to, when you start thinking about, oh, comparative advantage sounds so abstract at the national level, just think about specialization in your own life. You could be better at something at everything you do than someone else, but you don't have time to do it all. And it's incredibly wasteful for you not to follow the thing you're best at. That's also career advice, by the way. I double as a guidance counselor. All right, so that's really what I want to get you about comparative advantage. If you have the opportunity to trade as an individual, as a neighborhood, as a city, as a state, as a country, it allows you to specialize. Then when you specialize, the gains from trade soar because now you're doing the thing you're good at, your partner is doing the thing they're good at, and you have a lot more to offer each other. That's the idea of a comparative advantage. It applies even if you're better than them at everything. Applies to people, applies to countries, because trade allows specialization, and specialization increases the gains from trade. There is a line in your text that says the following: international trade leads to mutual gain because it allows each country to specialize more fully in the production of those things that it does best. Not really true, missing one word, comparatively best. It's not an absolute thing. It's not like I'm absolutely better at childcare than providing food. What matters is my relation to everybody else who can produce this. So if my best thing, the highest productivity I have in isolation is providing childcare, but there's someone else who's almost as good as me or better than me in childcare, I should switch to my next best thing. This is a complicated thing for people to talk about. And why would you ever not do your best thing? Because there's so much opportunity for trade that you should do the thing that fits in best with the world economy. That point, that little one word I just stick in, is where the real fights are. The real fight should not be over people saying we can't gain from trade, trade hurts us. That's a silly argument. It's made for special interest purposes. The real fights are over, do we like our place in the international economy? The U.S. is probably best, and let's just take away innovation for a moment, which I'll talk about later. The U.S., other than innovation, which is huge, so I'm taking away a huge thing, the best thing the U.S. is at is agricultural production. That's what we're best at in the international system. We have all the good land, and we know how to use it, and we're organized right, and we grant full extent of private property, which almost no one else does. Now, would Americans be happy if really all we exported was agricultural products? A lot of people wouldn't. They'd say, I don't know, agriculture, I want advanced technology for security purposes, or other people are getting high, they're higher on the value chain. They have engineers, we just have farmers, by the way. Farmers are absolutely crucial to any society, and all the major agricultural producers in the world are rich, exporters, pardon me, are rich countries. Farmers are above average in income. Farmers get a really bad rap in China and India, where I study. But some people might want to have engineers. That's the real issue. The real issue is not that there aren't huge gains from trade. The real issue is you can't make your people better off from trading because you can, and people who argue against that are not seeing things clearly. The real issue is, are you happy at what you're best at? So I'm going to be extremely pro-trade. I want to deny some of the arguments that are made against trade and against free trade because I think they're silly, and I'll try to show you they're silly. But there are other arguments that are less silly and a little more difficult to grapple with. So I've mentioned U.S. comparative advantages in agriculture and innovation. Now I'm going to make a China point because I want to bring China in this because it's a major trade issue and because I know a lot about it. The reason China's commercial cyber theft is such a big deal is it's aimed at our comparative advantage. They're trying to undermine it. Now, that doesn't mean every individual Chinese hacker is thinking, ha, Ricardo has shown me the way to destroy America. Of course not. They're thinking about the individual piece of information they're going to steal and sell or use to advance themselves in some other way. Nonetheless, cyber theft is most important to the US because that's where our advantage lies. When you're thinking about this as an issue, what does the US get from trade? We do best in innovation and agriculture. That's what we export. That's what we offer to the world. If people steal it instead, we don't gain nearly as much from trade. It's hard to steal large-scale agricultural products. Don't know the ship that's floating out of the harbor with all the wheat. No, don't look at that. Look over there. There's a dolphin. That usually doesn't work. Stealing information now didn't used to work. It used to be exactly the same thing. Spies would have a briefcase full of documents. Not good enough. Now you can steal it in huge amounts. So Chinese hackers broke into Nortel, which if you're young, you don't even know what Nortel is. It's a Canadian telecom company, now dead. Stole all their stuff. And suddenly there was a leap in Chinese telecom capacity, and they just became much more competitive. They just drove the Canadians out of telecom. That wasn't comparative advantage, that wasn't trade, that was theft. So just because you're a free trader, which is definitely me, doesn't mean there aren't issues that are troubling for open trade.